start with. We're joined by Elaine Keenan-O'Malley, who's with the law firm EIP. Welcome, Ellen. Azzurra Moores, who's from the fact-checking charity Full Fact. Welcome, Azzurra. And Adam Dustagheer, who's from the consultancy Datnexa, which specialises in data science, AI and machine learning. Welcome, Adam. Okay. So I think let's start off by perhaps the three of you describing a bit how your day job is involved with AI and the debate that we're going to have today. Do you want to start?
Hi, thank you all for coming. So I work at EIP, which is a specialist IP law firm, and AI is, it feels like overnight sort of became like a massive topic for a lot of our clients. And I think one of the key things from a reputational perspective that our clients are really trying to grapple with is transparency, and to what extent do they need to disclose how they're using it, and also if they're like procuring an AI tool, how much can they rely on the transparency of the suppliers? So it's that sort of angle that I'm sort of navigating quite a lot with our clients.
Great. Hi all. So I work at Full Fact, the UK's independent fact-checking organisation. And who's heard of Full Fact here? Oh my gosh.
It's brilliant.
And my day job essentially involves verifying whether something is fact or fiction, and then talking to the government about what they can do about it. So in terms of AI, it's saying, is something AI generated? Is this a misleading piece of content that's trying to mislead the public? And really, how can the government intervene? Can they improve regulation? Can they tighten restrictions? And really, what's their appetite to implement any change? Spoiler alert, there's not much appetite, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit in today's panel. But essentially, it's looking for solutions to counter the most harmful forms of AI-generated content is a big part of my day job.
Cool. I'm Adam Dustagheer from Datnexa. We're a small but mighty consultancy, very much like Parisi, I think. And we're tech for good. So we have this idea of big ideas, bold technology, better tomorrow. We work with companies like Parisi and help them build beautiful things like Parisi Blue. We also build our own tools within the public sector. So we work with local government, and we kind of try and use AI use cases for public betterment. And then we put all of that together, and we do a lot of pro bono, kind of like third sector training and consulting to kind of help other people get involved in the conversation and kind of broaden out what AI can mean for society and for good at the same time.
Thank you. I wanted to start actually by picking up on Azzurra's point about misinformation, because that's the thing that worries me the most as a journalist. And actually, when I left the BBC, because I was at the BBC as a tech reporter for many years, I was getting a lot of people contacting me on LinkedIn and telling me that asking me if I'd written these stories which were about crypto investments, too good to be true crypto investments. The article on first glance looked like it was a real article. It had a BBC template, it had my name on it, everything looked just as it would if you went to the BBC website, but the story was nonsense. It was an interview with a celebrity, with Keir Starmer, with Zoe Ball, with Jeremy Clarkson, who apparently had invested in this crypto and were trying to persuade others to do the same. And people genuinely believed it might be real. And that obviously annoyed me. It affected my reputation. I just left the BBC and was trying to kind of make my way in the freelance world. So I became quite fascinated by this to the extent that I now do a podcast on it. But my first question to my panel is, that stuff is really quite dangerous, isn't it? And when I'm getting people contact me on LinkedIn, a network where people are professional, where people probably do have a degree of cynicism about content, and they're not convinced whether something is real or fake, that's a very worrying world that I wouldn't even say going into. We're there, aren't we? It's happening. So given that's your speciality, do you want to start, Azzurra, with your thoughts?
I mean,
what we do about it?
Well, what we do about it is a huge question. What I will say is, I think people think they are way better than they are at spotting AI-generated misinformation.
Yeah.
I work with a team of brilliant fact checkers day in, day out, and they struggle always to understand what's going on. So already that's a huge problem, that the way in which AI has developed has become so sophisticated that it's really difficult. And that's, images. When we're talking audio content, this is something that actually, the world's best can't always tell. So I think that's important for us to look at. The other thing I think it is worth saying, Jane, is you were saying we're in this situation. This is the worst the situation has ever been. I mean, Full Fact has been running now for over 15 years. And let me tell you, we're at a total low point in how bad the misinformation landscape is. Not only because it's completely perverse across our environment, it's because no one wants to do anything about it. And a lot of the stuff you were mentioning, so, ruining someone's reputation, mimicking someone and saying that you are an expert and selling, medical content or selling, scams and things. These things aren't really considered harmful. They're considered pretty bad. Oh no, that's gonna fool a few people. But actually, unless someone is getting cash from you or it's causing serious medical illness, no one really wants to intervene. The platforms don't want to do anything, the government doesn't want to do anything. And we have this silly debate at the moment around, is it too harmful to intervene? And certainly when we're talking about reputation, it's your own reputation. If it's hurting your reputation, to me, that's a huge indicator of harm. So really what I would say to this is, what can we do about it? Well, I think the government has to understand this is a huge problem. I think people have to say, no, do you know what? I don't want this to happen anymore. And whether that means they are improving their own transparency, whether people are calling the government to say enough's enough. I think those are some of the big starting points, when we can talk a bit further down the line about specific regulatory changes. But actually, it's getting to a point now where we all need to stand up and say enough's enough. As a baseline starting point.
Adam, when we were chatting before this event, you used the phrase that we have to think about how we define trust in a post-trust world.
Yeah.
We're in that post-trust world already, aren't we?
Yeah.
So how do we? And what's your advice to people?
So it is interesting to see. I think we're geeks, but we all used to work in strategic communications as well. So we think with both hats on. And I think what we've seen is this sort of way. It's harder and harder to discern what's true, what isn't, what can you trust, what can't you trust. Also, overall, the nature of trust has changed. It used to be, like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, you'd have local trust defined in a geographic area. We've then moved to institutional trust, which was you trust the BBC or the government. That's eroding. We've now moved into this world of network trust, that I would trust you because I follow you on LinkedIn. Therefore, we have that network. And if you say, we should listen to Nick, then I would be like, okay, I'm going to do that. So that landscape shifting, and I think where we're moving into, we're coming at it from 2 points of view. One is national organizations trying to get out a communications message. And the other one is local authorities trying to convince people that they are trustworthy. Because if you're dealing with vulnerable populations, they are the victims of a lot of this scamming activity. So they may not trust an email from the council, but if you are the council, how do you get them to trust it? Because it's vital that happens. So I think for us, a lot of time, what we're thinking about is how you can build up these networks and how you can institute these new versions of trust. I think that's increasingly going to be the role of larger organizations or wherever one has a network to think about how you can convey that across the board. So I think that's I think the answer to it is yet to be seen, but I think we need to accept that things have changed and we need to work out how we can get into that and not just affect the institutions, but build our own networks within which we can instill trust.
And then your clients were concerned about this, that before we even get into the debate about using AI in the workplace, that the information that surrounds us is no longer entirely reliable and is increasingly being injected because of the ease with which AI can create content. There's almost as much AI content out there as there is real content. What's your advice to clients who might be concerned about that?
I think you, as you said, we're already in it. It's been an issue. So I was in-house for a long time, and I've been grappling with this issue even before everyone started talking about AI. And I think, unfortunately, the law is behind the time, and I think that's the problem. And I think even for as lawyers, we're sort of always on the back foot. And I think what our advice is to say is really about governance and training and making sure that your employees are being vigilant. And when I worked in a bank, and one of the things was we'd have every month training to identify deepfakes, because people were calling up our sales desk and being like, oh, you need to transfer money. And it becomes so sophisticated. And I think also our clients, organizations are really worried. And I think it's more about a training piece, because the law is only be able to be reactive. And so there's, I think ultimately it is about training and sort of empowering your employees to call stuff out, is really what we can do, and try and say, oh, look, you might, it's becoming more sophisticated. Have you, this new tool is becoming more, injected into your systems. Be aware of this. It started with, I think a couple of years ago, everyone was talking about how, if you spot an email and it will be, instead of saying .com, it might be like some sort of like bizarre email address. And so now that seems so sort of simple to identify, that's sort of like, but it's now trying to keep up with the changes of technology.
But then we need to change the law as well.
Yes.
We need to make that advancement where we're saying, actually, if the law is outdated, of course it's going to take time to get it right, but now is the time. And we can't wait.
This is a hard job for politicians, though, isn't it? Because technology is always ahead of any sort of law regulation. Changing law works very slowly. These tools are just coming out at a rate of knots. The new tool that allows you to create deep fake videos, which is actually being used for some really interesting content as well. And some of the content is harmless. It's even been given this term AI slop. But where you just look at a video of something. Have you all seen this stuff on social media feeds where you look at a video? They're often like from the natural world. So, I don't know, polar bears kind of walking amongst humans holding that. It's really random stuff, but it does distort our view of reality, doesn't it? What can governments do about that kind of thing before they even start to think about misinformation that might sort of affect democracy? There's a lot to think about, isn't there?
Yeah. It's a huge question. And one thing I would say,
Thursday morning,
and no coffee lunch. Going back to a point of, is AI, can it be generated for good? I think to go back to that point also, there was a really interesting example in New York of someone who was running for, you're going to have to give me, I don't remember what, but they had all of their political videos translated into multiple languages using AI generated software. And it basically meant they could reach a huge group of people that they would have never talked to before. And when I think we have this conversation, I don't want us to forget the potential and the power and the possibility that can come with this incredible software. Let's not forget that. That being said, you're right, there's a ton of slop out there. And what can politicians do? I think when it's not something that's as harmful as, a misinformation or a piece of scam that's trying to take money from you, it really has to be about labeling. It has to be about, an increased transparency where something says, this is made with AI. We need to say that. We need to have that as a baseline in all of our content. And there's lots of debates on whether that is worthwhile. Personally, from my perspective, I think that's a great step forward. And then let's talk about the next steps. But actually, let's start with a clear label. This is AI-generated content. But why is there a hesitation? There is a hesitation because people don't want to move quickly. There is a hesitation because some of these videos are really funny. Let's not forget that. Like, satire content is funny to watch, and you become a bit of a fun police if you say this needs to have a label that says it's AI generated content. But I don't know, call me old fashioned. I think something that's increasing safety and transparency is probably more important than it being a little bit funny. So that's to me where I would start. I would look at labeling first, and then we need to start defining what is harm and adding in thresholds there. And from there, we can start to legislate a bit further.
Yeah, that's a great point you made. I was talking to the founder of Synthesia, which is an AI-generated video company, and he told me that within 5 years, somebody will be able to make a Hollywood-grade movie from their bedroom just because the quality of the tools is getting so good. And I mean, we should embrace that sort of creativity and the use of AI for good. But again, what does government do? It's got to deal with scams, it's got to do with misinformation that could affect democracy, but it's also got all this other sort of grey area slop stuff that could be for good, could be for bad, nobody quite knows. How do they even begin to start navigating that?
I think there's a lot. Again, it's a big question for a Thursday morning. But
Sorry.
Give me 30 seconds and we'll have it cleared up. I think, the UK is in a really good position. It's gone for vertical regulation per sector with these overarching 5 principles. Europe's kind of gone for this big monolithic slab of regulation across the top of everything. And America, well, we'll see what happens. But with that, you think for UK PLC, the opportunity for vertical by vertical to define regulation that works for them based on principles that we all agree with could open up a whole world of new opportunity. And, I think content's one piece, but if you think about how we could apply this sort of technology to engineering, we do a lot of work with aviation, with defence, with stuff like that, with healthcare. It could be the engine room of UK PLC in years to come. Where I think to get it right is I love the idea of the 5-year movie sort of thing, a full movie. Don't tell me at that point you won't be able to license all of the Marvel characters for a monthly fee from Disney to make your own full-length movie that you'll be able to share on a streaming platform. And all of a sudden, I think there will be things that come in both from government and from market. Where I think it's interesting from a communications point of view is, these are tactics, they're tools. If I would say everyone in this room, objective strategy tactics, you'd know what I was talking about in terms of campaign planning. So you've got the objective, you've deployed the strategy, you've got these tactics, which are all of these new tools. You've got a quality assurance piece that needs to happen before you put it out the door. So you need to check even though it took you like 5 minutes to make a 3-hour movie, you still need to spend 3 hours watching said movie. And I think after that, there's this sort of curation piece where we will be looking to tastemakers who will say, this is real, this is good, do check it out. So there's going to be there'll be a lot of stuff. And I think that, again, is kind of where I get really excited. But I think that's all the medium term, and we just need to be so careful not to destroy everything in the short term, looking at this. So I think, those sorts of pieces. The one question that I'd really like any good answers for is we're starting to see a increase of baby boomers buying into conspiracy theories because of the quality of, and they are like, I can tell the difference, but then they're being had. Yeah. Now, from a public health point of view, that's a really big problem because you're starting to see reticence for things that will help keep the adult social care budget down over the course of the next 2 decades. So I think how this shakes loose will be really interesting.
Yeah. Gen Z are also very sceptical. My son doesn't believe the moon landings happened, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do? We've used the word law, regulation a lot. Is there specific things that should be being done that aren't being done yet?
I think, as Adam said, I think the UK government, and I do actually support this approach, they've decided that instead of like rushing in and having like this big overarching regulation like the EU AI Act, they've sort of said sector specific. So the government and all the different regulators within each sector is constantly issuing guidance. And I actually think that that's a much better approach because they're working directly with the people in that sector to say, look, this is your technology, these are the risks, we need to give guidance. I think though there is, and it's the elephant in the room, the big tech companies do have a massive influence, especially on the UK government. They're sort of like post-Brexit, they're trying to navigate where they position themselves. And I think it's guidance for a reason. They don't want to be seen as being top down. And I think as a consequence, we're going to remain behind the curve. And I think people need to be lobbying and saying to their MPs, writing to government to say, look, this is actually having a huge impact on society and our children. I think the online safety bill is brilliant, but already it's not going, it's actually kind of out of date because it took so long to come in. Yeah. So I think it's sort of marrying regulation with guidance and also basically saying to tech, you know what, we're going to fine you and punish them for what the damage that they are doing and make them more accountable. Should there be criminal sanctions? It's sort of basically saying actually we care about our people rather than money, which is hard.
It's shocking how we haven't seen those big fines come in yet. I don't know if anyone else saw it, but there was an article on Reuters the other day that said that I think the figures were something like of the income that Meta makes, 16 billion is from scam ads and other sort of content that falls into that disinformation basket. So there's no incentive for them to do anything because they're making vast amounts of money from it. Let's talk about big tech for a minute, because recently Google's CEO has said we shouldn't blindly trust AI models. You know, these are the companies that have thrust these out into the world, and now that we're all integrating them and becoming increasingly reliant on them on a daily basis, they're like, actually, yeah, they are still a little bit not perfect. What did you think about that comment, and what people take from that, how they should sort of take that advice?
It's I think it's good advice,
Yes.
really. You know, when you go back and you look at some of those core models, you know, so like ChatGPT, 26% of that training corpus was from Reddit. I don't know if you've read Reddit, but it's, you know, it's iffy at best. I think with this, again, just to bring it back, AI is a tool. AI is a tool like no other, and it's held a mirror up to us. So we've got a minister for AI, right? We never had a minister for Excel spreadsheets, but we use them as much, right? So what is it about this that is different? It's more human. It does things that we used to think we could only do ourselves. But to trust it too much is folly. We recently spoke to Dr. Sarah Wire, who looks at the intersectional bias of language models. And when you start looking at how the language being used within the model underlying it, you know, it's something that we need to focus on overall as society. Say, hang on, there's a needle that needs to be changed. When you look at bias between global north and global south, and you know the danger of losing knowledge from areas that have not participated in the initial founding of models, that again is a big thing. So I think
or not credited.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's huge amounts of that when you look in terms of like what's going on in terms of the kind of like the artistic world, what's happened in terms of historic stuff.
Have been developed in Kenya, and
Yeah.
a huge scandal about how little they basically reinvented
Yeah.
the slave trade, but digitally.
I think there's a lot of, I mean, like the economics of it and kind of all of that part around techno-feudalism and kind of how that works as well. And, you know, then that's a question for government at that piece. But I think overall, you know, where we're thinking about this is it's a tool, and it's a tool to be used, but like any tool, it's a powerful tool. It needs to be used appropriately. So I think healthy skepticism, you know, not over trusting it, not over investing in it, I think are key things in helping across the board.
Azzurra, have we all got to sort of have that healthy skepticism and in a way think more like journalists, not just when we're looking at content for fun, but when we're working with this stuff as well?
Totally. And do you know, I don't know how many parents there are in the room, but do you know what's really worrying me at the moment is people are starting to think about the next election. You know, we've just seen bits about the budget, and as many of you know, the government is lowering the voting age to 16. I'm really worried about AI in elections. Let me just say it, you know, and I think telling people to be a bit skeptical is probably a good thing. We're going to start to see scenarios where, you know, 12, 13-year-olds now are starting to believe everything they read online. I think we need to tell people from a really young age, be skeptical, here's how to use the models, here is, you know, your typing class that you take in school. At the same time, here is a lesson on how, you know, how to safely and actively use the internet. And yeah, a bit of skepticism, I think. So, you know, particularly as we go into periods like elections, where actually it's not just a question of, you know, is this persuading people in how they think, but it's persuading how they vote. Yeah, I'd like to see a bit of skepticism.
What are the main concerns you have with AI in elections then?
Oh gosh, so political deepfakes is a huge concern of mine. And if I think I'm concerned, politicians themselves are even more concerned. But I'm mostly concerned about people using ChatGPT, AI overviews as a search engine. And, you know, these are generative AI. They are making up responses to you. I don't want people to be asking questions on how should I vote, or I believe in these three things, which party should I vote for? Now, I'm not going to tell people to not use AI, but I want people to use it safely. And I think for me, that is a massive concern. But really just misinformation more broadly, how it's going to sway how people vote, how it's going to sway how young people vote, how it's going to sway how, you know, 12, 13-year-olds are going to start to be influenced now for an election in 3, 4, 5 years' time. That's really concerning to me. So when I think about, you know, what I'm asking the government to do, I'm always starting with an election period because really it's in their vested interest to do more. And elections are isolated periods. You can have a bit of a sort of tighter restriction on how you look at the internet. So that to me is a huge place to start. But I mean, there's all sorts of other things there too.
Yeah. Ellen, as a journalist, you don't rely on one source, you go to several sources. That's just, how we kind of fact check everything that we write about. But when people go to something like ChatGPT, they're probably not going to cross-reference that with an Anthropic model or something else, are they? So, is that something that you would advise, that people look across the board at these models before they take anything they say, or are they all going to tell you the same thing because they've all kind of basically learned from the same source, which is the internet?
100% agree, and I think that's probably the best rule of thumb. Do not just trust one source, and I think it's also trialing different tools to see what's best for your output. That's what is the purpose of what you're looking at ChatGPT, for example, or or is it that actually a lot of people, for example, are being pushed at the moment to use Copilot because Microsoft have got it and they're putting it as a package deal, and everyone's blindly using it. And it's training itself, and people are like, oh, do you want me to draft your email in the style of this? Because I saw you wrote to Jan on this date in this style. And then all of a sudden, we're all not thinking about it. And I think it needs to come back to every tool has a purpose, but we wouldn't use Excel for a PowerPoint presentation, and we know that. So why are we just sticking with one AI tool? Because that's what's being pushed to you. So I think employers in particular, because I think, at least from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of clients saying, oh, we're trialing this tool. And it's like, well, be a bit more adventurous. Empower your employees to pilot other tools and see whether that's actually better than what you're being pushed. And also then you can make an assessment. Oh, actually, that tool was not very good at that, but it was good at this. And then you can really actually have an informed decision of whether it was good at what it was meant to be and whether it's trustworthy and things like that. But I think also not enough people realize that the data that you're putting into those tools, how it's being used, you blindly sign up to T's and C's.
Don't even read them.
Exactly.
Adam?
Yeah, I was just going to say the Copilot thing's really interesting. So we're seeing a lot with public sector who were pushed onto Copilot quite early, like Copilot fatigue is a real thing. And I used to say that Copilot was like a Swiss Army knife, like pretty good at a lot of stuff. But if you're using the screwdriver attachment every day, just go and buy an electric screwdriver, because that's the one that you're using. Recently, it was described to me as a plastic fork, which I think is probably better. It does the job, but given the choice, you'd probably rather have a real fork. So I think the thing that will start, like from a corporate organizational development and kind of an IT point of view, we're now seeing all of the big players in the past week have released their agentic workflow stuff. And that allows you to put in the corporate guardrails. It allows you to apply safeguarding policies, things like that, choose the information that you put into it. And I think as those tools start to become the predominant sort of way, it'll replace the Office 365s, for instance, that will change the nature of work going forward. But yeah, the Copilot stuff is just, jury's out. But.
And these companies are locked into these deals, aren't they, with big tech companies like Microsoft? So, even if they want to trial other things, they sort of can't, because, it would have a big cost effect on them. So we've seen this tool being demonstrated, Adam. Do you think that all organizations should have a similar kind of tool in their toolkit?
I'm biased, but yes, absolutely. Everyone should. I think, look, with this sort of thing, at the moment, there'll be some organizations where the risk appetite to move on to new emerging technology is just not there, or it's inappropriate. I think where this sort of tooling is, it's often as a company, technology won't be your unique selling point. But it will be your accelerator over the next 3 to 5 years as everyone onboards this technology, which will soon be ubiquitous. So I think if there is a degree of competitive edge or kind of like market positioning you can get from these tools, I think that's where we're seeing companies start looking at it. So something like Parisi Blue I really like, because it ties into these ideas of strategic deployment of communication, the framework thinking that you need to look at multiple different data sets, which you've never looked at before because it's been too tricky to manually aggregate them. The idea of curation and understanding what's going on after the fact. And I think then all of that kind of comes full loop back into the planning piece. So if that's something that then makes sense in terms of where you can be like, right, I could really use this to do that, and organisationally that's where the place is. That's where I think it hits a sweet spot, and the opportunity for acceleration in kind of market leadership, sector leadership, I think is huge. And if you're so we often kind of work with people not looking at what sector they're in or what size they are, but almost like what the appetite for change is, what the innovation piece is. Mm-hmm. So something like this, you can see how it fits in, and similarly for other tools in other parts of the business, I'm sure.
So when it comes to tools, what's your advice for AI in the workplace?
I mean, Full Fact has a fact-checking tool that is AI generated, and we use it. We use it here in the UK, but we also have global organisations that use it as well, and it helps us fact-check at scale. And I think that's really the point we don't want to miss out on. Actually, the scalability of what you can do when you use AI safely is enormous. We often say it allows these tiny fact-checking organisations in Senegal, for example, to do the work of what our very large fact-checking organisation in London can do. A team of 2 can do what 15 can do. So my advice is use it, use it well, get on it quickly, because otherwise you're going to be far delayed to everyone else. But use it with a degree of transparency. So there are lots of really interesting journalism organisations that are saying, if we have had AI help us write a story, we're going to say that. Same with Full Fact. We just need to make sure we are being so clear about what we're doing and why, so that we ourselves are inspiring transparency within the tech companies as well. And if we set our standards, then others will follow. So that's what I would say.
Adam mentioned the word agents. AI agents is the buzz phrase of the day, week, month. But I'm not sure people entirely kind of understand what it is. So what is your understanding of it? And where does it sort of affect that whole trust question? Because from what I see, AI agents are given degrees of autonomy that could make reputation, trust, all of those things that we're talking about today even more concerning. Ellen?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Is that honestly that it's got more. It's that one step further than the generative AI, and I think there's that concern around what's it been trained on? Is there a bias, and how do you intervene if that's been spotted? And I think there is just I think it could be great, but I also just think approach it with caution, and I don't think companies should be blindly adopting that approach. Is my thought process at this stage.
AI agents, is it just another layer of complexity in an already complex?
Yes, absolutely. But also, I totally agree with everything Alan said. I think it's also making people crave more and more in-person, real communication. I certainly do, where if you feel like you've been duped a little bit by the idea that you're talking to something that isn't real, you think, why can't I just pick up the phone and talk to someone? And it's not my expertise, but when we're talking about companies, when we're talking about reputation, I think real people still go a really long way. So yes, it's massively complex, and I think it's the point we have to forget though. And when I talk about sort of development and changes, I'm not at any point saying we shouldn't embrace these technologies, because they're here to stay. No one in this room is going to be able to change that. To me, I think it should be clear that it's an AI engine. That's my own view, but should be married with an output that is really real and in person at the same time.
Adam, when I hear people talking about using AI agencies, they do often use the word transparency and say that they're very clear on the path that an agent has taken, which is encouraging. But then I also think about human nature and being quite lazy. To your point about not reading T's and C's, how long are we going to read the sort of report about how an agent has got to, and then just let it get on with it?
Yeah. It's not very long at all. We did a tool that wrote a report, and we purposefully left off the summary section. So you had to read the entire thing and write the summary, and that was like our sort of the hack of the human, if you will. I think the agent stuff's really interesting, and when it's used at scale, it's interesting. And the way that we're starting to think about it is not as individual agents, but as if within an organization you're about to hire a new team, but it's digital labor instead of human labor. Each member of that team, in the same way that a human would have a job description with the role and then what's expected of the person in terms of the corporate governance, each one of those tools needs that same level of oversight, because you're quite right. There gets to a point where it's it's hard to explain what's happened and how it's arrived at an answer. And then there's also a bit of a sort of an interesting comms dilemma, I would say. What would you choose, given you have to be transparent and explain what's going on to a group of people, like just random group? Do you choose technical accuracy, which is really obtuse to get into, or something that's absolutely understandable? Because there's two options there, and it's kind of like, what's your objective? Is it for the person to understand the contextual use of this or the actual technical use of it? So that's the sort of thing where you get into the ethics of AI and pieces like that. But yeah, no, all of this will be the future of work, I feel.
Mm-hmm. And on that question about the future of work, I was reading a report from MIT, I think it was a few months ago, that said lots of businesses are integrating AI into their workflows. Everybody wants to do that, but the figure of businesses that were actually finding it was helping make their businesses work more efficiently was very low. So something like 95% of businesses that integrated these tools hadn't really seen any sort of good things come out of it, as it were. Is that just because we're at the early stages with this tech, or is that just because we've, again, blindly believe that AI is going to solve all our problems, and actually the reality is that it hasn't? Anybody want to take that one?
I think it's because people don't know how to use it.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's
think
true.
it's as
We're not
simple as
trained
that.
properly, are we?
There was I'm going to say this. It was a really interesting tweet I saw, but I'm not even allowed to call it a tweet anymore.
No, an X.
Yeah, where someone had asked ChatGPT to make an email they had written shorter. And someone was saying, that's not how this works. You can't just say make something shorter and assume you're going to have this brilliant piece of content. Of course that's not helping your productivity. We need to be learning the tools and tricks and trade to really understand how to advantage us. And that, to me, needs to start from, obviously everyone in this room should be taking, special lessons, but actually from a really young age. In schools, we need to be doing this. We need to be doing, an advanced curriculum that says, actually, if AI is going to be part of how we communicate in the workplace, how we educate our young people, how we talk to one another, how do we use it?
Mm.
And that is something that the government has made some advancements on. So for anyone here working in education policy, they just announced a new curriculum review, which is something that comes out every decade, and teaching young people how to spot fake news, teaching young people how to incorporate AI within the curriculum, having AI be a core component of computing lessons is going to be something that in 3, 4, 5 years' time is pretty normal. So that's fine. So young people are on board. People in this room, we're probably all right. We're probably using it day to day. Now, what do we do about the much older generation, the people that are being scammed, the people that are actually not able to spot fake content, who are going to be completely duped out of a lot of money? That I don't have an answer to, because really, I would argue a lot of those people don't want to move forward. But they're still a vital part of the workforce. So I think there is a real question to ask of making sure we bring everyone along with us in this journey.
Skills, Ellen, is that something that concerns your clients as well, that we're not kind of equipped to use these tools?
I think that is actually, in fact, I was at a roundtable last night and we were talking about, in all sectors, that the positives of AI is actually it's created new jobs. It's created this, a skills gap, in fact. So now we need people to be able to do these jobs. But then you're right, it's that, if there's people starting out, it's like, well, what do you do to actually train you for those tools so then you feel confident to start using it and knowing when it's appropriate or not? For example, at EIP, we have like a monthly AI dedicated training, and it will be, right, there's this new tool that's been that's come out, and and then someone will present on how it's been used and how it could be useful. And I think that should be more encouraged, I think, in organisations. I think that making people feel responsible for teaching and encouraging other people to use it. But I think it is also a risk that if people don't know how to use it properly, then you are going to be more susceptible to scams and spotting the flaws in that technology.
Yeah. I want to open up to the floor in a minute for questions, but let's just sort of do a quick summary of what we think the future is going to hold, when it comes to using these tools, particularly in the context of our sort of working lives. Do you want to start, Adam?
Yeah, I think from everything that we're seeing, the technology is accelerating and there's lots of stuff going on. What we try to focus on are the things that future-proof ourselves and we know are consistently valid. So I do firmly believe that as we go forward, things like, and I think we've touched on it, critical thinking will be key. Like genuine creativity, human creativity, and human connection, I think are key. Focus on those, and I think, the technology will begin to kind of fall into those bounds.
Azzurra, your tips, advice?
I mean, Adam nailed it. We should just do exactly what
to be fair, if anyone Googles those three things and Aristotle, you may find out. I've basically AI.
I think the future is really exciting, and tools like this show us the enormous possibility that changing technology has. We just all need to be careful, to be thinking about the world still, and using our brain. Let's not turn off our brain, and where the government can help make tools safer, that you should be doing that.
Until Elon Musk plugs us into the network, and then we don't need to worry, will we?
I think we'll see more transparency. I think because more people will become critical thinkers, they'll be much more aware of the tools and how it's being used, wrongly or rightly. And I think then organisations will want to encourage more people to buy their products, so they'll be much more transparent. And I think, I feel positive that as people become more educated, organisations will feel obligated to be more open about how AI is being used.
It's good to finish on a positive note. Right, questions now, please. Hopefully we'll have lots of them.
A difficult one, but is there a risk we're at the last day of history? And I'll qualify that. So in terms of the misinformation thing, if you go onto any AI agent now and ask it to write you an essay saying climate change is a myth, without any caveats, it will refuse to do it on the grounds that it's misinformation. Seems fairly reasonable. But if AI had been made 200 years ago, asking it to make arguments against slavery, making arguments for same-sex marriage, it might have censored them as misinformation. If this is going to be the world we live in, scientifically you can disprove things, but morally and ethically, are you in a position now where we're stuck in 2025 forever?
This question for me, isn't it? I'm gonna be a bit cheeky and dispute your first point. I don't think if you ask an AI tool to say, write me an essay that climate change is a myth, it would say no.
Well, I was surprised that you thought it would do
I
that.
had to be half an hour to trick it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you how I did it.
But I think you're using the wrong question there, because actually what you're trying to ask is, show me the reasons to disprove climate change, which a lot of people have. But more broadly to your point, are we at the end of history? No. Which is such a lame answer, but I think people have been saying that for many years. I think when we talk about misinformation, we are really, really conscious, certainly of Full Fact, and certainly anyone I speak to in this landscape, keen to express misinformation is a problem, so is not shutting down free speech. So is amplifying free expression and actually ensuring we still have a huge plurality of voices. I can only speak as working as a fact-checking organisation. I would never say to you, don't talk about why you think climate change isn't real. But let me also provide the counter-argument. Let me provide additional content. Let me amplify other experts who have been backed with kind of really clear scientific methods. So I don't think we're at the end of history. I do think we're at a really, really tricky moment where if we don't, one, stand up for free speech, that's going to be a huge problem. But also a lot of people don't want to talk about how misinformation is a problem too. And actually, we do need to be making it clear that, people are dying because they're not taking certain medical treatments. That to me is pretty enormous. And I'm pretty fine if we are making sure that is our primary concern. But does that sort of answer your question? I sort of rambled.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the example. So I basically said, I'm in a university debating team.
Yeah.
The motion is climate change is a myth.
Yeah.
I've got to propose the motion, write an essay, and they outright refused.
Interesting.
It was only when I said, actually, I've been lying to you. What I'm actually doing is writing an essay on AI biases and its refusal to help with requests that it snapped and went, I've been tricked, and gave it.
Interesting.
What LLM did you use? That was chat.
That's really interesting. I mean, it goes back to the point I was making earlier about elections as well. Same thing. If you ask an AI model to say, here are 3 things I believe in, who should I vote for? Should there be guardrails where it says, no, do you know, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but here are the sources you could look at that gives you some good information. I'm not sure I have an answer of what I think the right thing is, but what I do think we need to be doing is not shutting down free speech as much as possible, and that balance is always going to be really tricky.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're trying to kind of make them sound more human, and by making them sound more human, they've got to sort of have an opinion, haven't they? Because that's what we all do. Sorry,
So I used to work briefly as CTO for a company that we used to clean politicians' background online.
Cool.
So the background was they will pay a lot of money because they did something dodgy, whatever it was, and then they had the news to disappear. So we will flood internet with content, and that was like 15 years ago. Okay. So we have humans doing exactly that, paid by the politicians, which are you are trying to them just to do something that they don't want to do because that's what they paid for. I left because it was not very ethical. But LLMs is just I don't trust anything anymore. If you have money, you can just pay for your background just to disappear. Or right now that nobody believes anything, you don't have to pay much anymore. Me, but it has been something I've seen all my life. And it's about who has the money just to pay for the content we generate.
Sure. But the point you're making is that actually these issues we're discussing, they're not new issues.
No.
They're exacerbated, they're amplified, they are perhaps easier to do now, but the people that have the money have always been the ones in power. You know, you went all the way back to philosophy, that's not changed. And it shows us that the ethical debates have been there all along. I mean, I'm fascinated by what you used to do. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I just want to spend the rest of the day talking to you.
I would love to do more. But I mean, I think what's interesting now, perhaps if I could kind of flip your question, is politicians are concerned about this because it is impacting them directly as well. So, you know, when we talk about misinformation, when we talk about deepfakes, they are, in many cases, often the first victim of this. And it is impacting their future, it is impacting their re-election prospects. So I think they are keen to do something because they don't want to be impacted. But you're right, who has the money ultimately wins, and I certainly don't have an answer as how we tackle that. But we go back to the things we've raised all along: transparency, trust, amplifying the best voices possible, and hopefully we're in a slightly better situation.
Do either of the other panelists want to answer the original question about end of history, or should we move on to?
I'd just say the one thing is events, dear boy, events. And I think with AI, it depends where you want to take it, but you know, like there's a lot of other fields that have not developed as much, you know, since the 70s. So I think like engineering, manufacturing, things like that, where the application of this technology, there are radical new things kind of in the pipeline. So I think, you know, there could be several different, you know, developments that would just, you know, turn the world on its head. Quantum computing, that people are knocking on the door of that could be a big thing. And then on the other hand, I'd say AI is a technology that is an asymmetric one, that, you know, you can, as a small actor, have a disproportionate impact. And if you're a bad actor, whether state or like criminal enterprise, again, I think there's stuff going on there. So I think it would be, the end of history would be lucky. But I think, you know, where we are now, I think there's going to be some cool stuff happening, or terrifying, to see how it goes, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Virginia Crosby. I was the MP for Anglesey, which is an island in North Wales, and a real champion for nuclear. And your point about democracy and the electorate, I can't tell you, a few weeks ago, the MP WhatsApp group exploded when Rockopedia arrived, and everyone was reading their sort of.
I've never had more emails from MPs.
It was. Yeah. But I wanted to introduce a parallel. So I was a real advocate for nuclear, and when I arrived as the MP for Energy Island, I set about seeing what was missing, and part of it was the legislation. We set up the regulated asset-based model, so financing nuclear, and part of it was your point about people, setting up the APPG for SMRs. We also then had a new nuclear minister, so we're really seeing these parallels with nuclear. But I think your 2 points about people and trust really, really resonates. And the nuclear sector, you go to any nuclear meeting, it's like a wedding. Everyone knows everyone else. But it's that trust, and it's in a sector where we needed to get that trust in the sector. But I think the way forward for me with parliamentarians was nuclear meant, in their constituencies, it meant jobs. it meant good quality jobs. So it's really what is in it for them. And then I just want to end on a real high. I think it's what is happening in the sector with AI is really exciting, and I can put it down to now our judgment is so much more important. Our imagination is so much more important for driving it, and also our curiosity. So I would, really embrace it. I'm encouraging everybody to embrace it, and it's great to be part of it.
Yeah. I mean, your point around what do people care about, if they don't have money in their pockets, that's really all that matters. And when we think about solutions to this, why does misinformation spread? I mean, there's loads of reasons, but people who are often victims are the people who are disenfranchised, they are isolated, they probably feel like an outsider, and they probably feel like no one is there helping them, and that's usually because they don't have money. So you're right. I mean, in all these issues, how do we solve it? There's loads of things. We talk about community cohesion, etc. People need to feel wealthy. They need to feel richer. They need to feel better off, and that people are looking out for them. Definitely.
Was there a lot of disinformation around the nuclear issue that was sort of swaying people's views on the debate? Or?
Yeah, there's a sort of nuclear waste and things like that, and there's a really good there was a really good film at the Cannes Film Festival actually, and it was the fact that nuclear was linked to Hiroshima, and then also just sort of atomic warfare, and it's actually trying to break that misinformation.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious about what defines fake news. If we live in a country where the sun's existed for quite a while, and honestly, it's not even journalism at this point. I don't care if you work for them, I don't care if you're offended, but it's just like, what defines fake news? It's like when we were going on about, we're running on sound bites and buzzwords, and people are saying, oh, if you use your social media, you're in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
No two of us experience the same internet. So if you go to the same pub for 40 years, read the same newspaper for 45 years, listen to the same radio station for the next 50 years, is that not an echo chamber? My friend, I knew the person that set full fact. I remember they were crowdfunded, but it's now become a good. How's the most important almost tech product that's come out of the UK not known by more people? It's now a boutique thing that's just tucked in the corner, right? You're really in the know if you know full fact, but for the majority of the people, the Sun works as a business model because it's written so an 8-year-old can understand it. Nothing. I've got friends. I'm from a very modest background. I've got friends that went to Oxford. They say the main stories are shark bite, lightning strike, and someone gets rich overnight. Like, the truth is stranger than fiction, and I've trained as a film producer. They say cat sits on mat is not a story. Cat sits on dog's mat is a story, but now we want cat sits on unicorn's mat, and they're dealing with a thing where bullshit really sells. I don't know if you saw this week. There's a kid in Bangladesh that made over $300,000 reselling fake news about racism to racist people, and it's setting the internet alight. But it's just a thing where, why are we dithering in trying to regulate AI or set the parameters to have a conversation about AI when the guys who are funding it, they're basically funding the lexicon, the research, the product, the goods, the service. Even when they're all snake oil salesmen, like a lot of AI is not fit for purpose. Nobody wants to say that bit out loud. There are industries where it will thrive, and when people are saying AI slop, like my family's from Jamaica. Just a Category 5 hurricane is intrinsically linked to these heating centers, cooling centers that are working by AI, and then people are then making AI about the disaster, and it's like a never-ending loop. So, at which point are bright people like you guys going to get ahead of the curve as opposed to just? I've been in a meeting before where someone explicitly said, went to a school, then a law firm brought us into a boutique meeting like this. There are no ethics in AI. He looked in the audience and he said it straight and plain. My mouth was on the floor, and everybody was just like, okay. Like he said explicitly, one of the leading researchers doing it.
Should we try and unpick some of the questions you've asked? Because there's a lot of questions in there. So I think one great point you made at the start, which is, we think now that we're in this age of disinformation, but newspapers have been peddling fake news for a long time before that. And to your point about echo chambers as well, you know, it's not just the young that are in these internet bubbles. We're all in our own echo chambers, even if it's using different media. So any thoughts around those things first of all, and then we'll come back to some of your other points.
I'm going to say something slightly controversial, which is I don't know if it's a problem if people are in echo chambers. That's their choice. And you're right, there are people in this country who would have listened to the same radio station, bought the same newspaper, been with the same group of people. They're not doing any harm. And I think I'm okay with that. I think it's great that we live in a society that's pluralistic and encourages people to believe what they want to believe, so long as it's not harmful. Press regulation, I mean, that's an enormous question. This will be right up your street as well. We've had a tricky history with press regulation in this country, but I believe quite firmly that we are now at a point where the press is pretty well regulated, and they do actually have pretty high standards for how they operate. And when they break those points, there are punishments. So we have bodies like Ipso that will say, you know, that statistic is wrong, and Full Fact is often the front line of saying, hey, you've completely messed up a migration stat, fix it, and they will, for the most part. All of this is based on people's goodwill, but
you should have small corrections on.
yeah, they're small, definitely, but they're better than nothing. And I think we can't, there's a phrase I love that I always butcher, that's something like, we can't make perfection the enemy of the good. Like, we have to, I think I said that right, because I often mess with this. You know, that is a big step forward, and that is a step forward we've had in the last 10, 15 years. Well, think about what we're going to be able to do in further 10 years when we keep encouraging these things. And then to your last point, what we're doing about it, I promise you, I'm off to Parliament after this. I think it's important that we are talking to like-minded people. We're talking to people who disagree with us, and you know, certainly Full Fact, and I know you guys as well are pushing for these changes. And it's slow, change is slow, but when it happens, it does happen. And I think there are also a lot of good-willing people who want to see change.
Ellen, echo chambers.
I mean, from my perspective, I agree. Like there's good and bad with them, but I also think as when we're children, we're taught history, we're taught to analyze sources. I think for example, was studying law. I was told I had to, and we got them free. We had to read all newspapers to see the nuances, how it was being changed, the same story being written by different voices, and depending on what their agenda was. As lawyers, we're meant to be neutral, and I think come back to basics. Children are taught to analyze. That's what history is about. And I think as a young age, I think children will, critical thinking will just become even more inherent in how children think. And I'd like to think that optimistically, as they grow and get older, that will just be part of people's society and thinking. And echo chambers will be different. Someone will come in with an injection and say, look, I might not agree with this view, but have you thought this is why someone has that view? It might be that they've been disenfranchised, they might be isolated, they might be on the fringe. At least then you have that perspective to understand. But I think I think it will come from the ground up, and I think that is optimistic.
I think people of my age are also horrified that people are using, the young generation is using the internet in a particular way, because it was fairly new when I was young, and therefore, you were just amazed at the amount of information there was, and you wanted more and more of it. And now it's obviously being used in a different way. Adam, any thoughts on?
Yeah,
I
just think the kind of like the enormity of the question and all the things that it touches upon is almost like what we're talking about here. We're talking about these large language models, and I think in a way, the enormity of the question about these models and this sort of AI is really as big as the questions that one would have about something like language, and that's where it's coming from, right? So, what can you do about it? It's pretty big, and I know the feeling, and I look at a lot of stuff, and I'm like, what is it that I think I'm going to try and do with my like little firm, and we're going to go off and do that. And I think there's a few things that you can do. I think one is good design is diverse design is robust design. Therefore, you need as many people around the table when you're having these conversations. That isn't just technical people. It's making sure everyone's comfortable, able, and to participate, even if they go, we know nothing about this, but we have these views. That's like intrinsic. I think doing that will keep it honest in a way that we didn't have with something like social media, for instance. But it does begin to boil down to these ideas of language, and I think there's a choice, to make. There's this word of shibboleth. I don't know if there's any West Wing fans in here about, and I think it's in the good book somewhere, and in my world, it's a authentication software for like password handoff between websites. So it ticks a lot of boxes. But a shibboleth, and it was like a password that was, kind of a word of trust. But then we're seeing, and that's, I think, one side of how we can do that, how we can build networks that we can trust each other and use this stuff properly. On the other hand, flooding the zone, miscommunication, and dog whistle, I think, is the other thing. And it's almost, for me, it's the choice of, do we go for shibboleth or dog whistle? And I'm always going to advocate for that over the other, but I think that's all you can do when faced with such monumental things. It's kind of, global challenges and, many billions of dollars of invested income that way versus that way. So.
We nearly run out of time. I think we've got time for one final question if anybody has one.
Just on the back of Ellen's point, sort of about how news stories are done by different newspapers. So you'll have people read the Guardian, people read the Telegraph, kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. Are we going to end up in a world where you have left leaning and right reading AI? So
question?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
I'd love to see the left-leaning one.
Elon Musk's putting a lot of work into the right-leaning one.
Yeah. We'll give him a run for his money.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion this morning. Thanks to my panel. Let's all give you a round of applause. And yeah, this debate will go on and on, I feel. So we'll be back and having it at some time in the future, I'm sure. Thanks very much for joining us.